Forget what the movies told you. Real cowboys didn't load their gun belts with endless bullets and silver trim. They packed them with the things that kept them alive: oil, fire, coin, and luck. Every loop and pouch had a purpose. Every ounce of weight earned its place. These weren't fashion statements, they were survival kits. Today, we're digging up 15 things hidden in plain sight. The tools, weapons, and secrets tucked inside the belts of the men who lived by them. No myths, no Hollywood tricks. Just the truth, the small details that made the difference between life and death. So tighten your belt, check your cartridges, and meet the piece of gear that turned a strip of leather into a cowboy's personal bank vault. Number 15, the money belt, the bank you wore. Out on the frontier, a man's wealth couldn't live in a wallet. It had to ride where he could guard it, close to his gun and under his coat. That's where the money belt came in. Born after the gold rush and common, by the 1870s, these belts looked like ordinary cartridge rigs. But between the two layers of leather ran a long, hidden pocket, sealed with a brass zipper, button flap, or even a waxed seam. Inside went coins, folded bills, and sometimes fine gold dust wrapped in cloth. Drovers on long cattle drives carried their wages this way. Gamblers stitched theirs thick so a thief couldn't cut it without waking them. Even lawmen wore money belts under their cartridge rigs when traveling between towns. It wasn't comfort they wanted, it was control. Period catalogs from Montgomery Ward and Sears sold safety belts lined with oiled duck cloth to hide currency. Surviving examples at the Autry Museum and the Buffalo Bill Center show sweat stains and stretched seams where coins once pressed the leather thin. The myth says cowboys kept fortunes in saddlebags. The truth is simpler and smarter. If you wanted to keep your money safe in the Wild West, you wore the bank around your waist. Number 14, cartridge loops, counting your life in brass. Every cowboy's gun belt told a story, and the cartridges wrote it. Each loop stitched into the leather wasn't decoration, it was survival math. Every round was a choice: how long to stay in a fight, how far to ride before reloading. After the Civil War, when metallic cartridges replaced paper and cap and ball loads, saddlers began cutting tight leather loops sized to the new calibers: 4440, 45 Colt, 3840. They held the brass snug enough to keep it from falling, loose enough to draw blind in the dark. A good belt carried 12 to 24 rounds. More looked impressive, but it dragged at the hips and bit into the ribs on long rides. Rawhide or tallow kept the loops from cracking in desert heat. Some cowboys even soaked their belts in oil so the cartridges slid smooth after rain. Look close at museum pieces today and you'll see faint rings, dark ovals burned into the hide where shells once rested. That pattern isn't decoration, it's accounting. Hollywood gave cowboys endless ammo. The real West didn't. Each cartridge loop was a promise, and every empty space meant one less chance to survive. Number 13, gun oil and grease tin, because dust wins if you don't. The West ate metal alive. Dust, sweat, and alkali grit worked into every moving part of a revolver. If you didn't oil it, it died. That's why cowboys carried small tins of grease and gun oil tucked into their belts or coat pockets, sometimes old tobacco tins refilled with tallow, bear fat, or whale oil. A thumb smear across the cylinder pin kept a Colt from locking solid. A drop on the hammer screw kept the trigger pull light and clean. Cavalry manuals from the 1870s recommended neat's foot oil or sperm oil applied sparingly, but most men made do with whatever slick they had. A few even mixed lamp oil and axle grease into a foul-smelling paste that worked just the same. Those stains you see on surviving gun belts, dark halos around the loops and seams, that's not age, that's oil. Years of it, soaked in by men who understood one truth of frontier life: you don't clean a gun to make it pretty. You clean it because if you don't, the desert will. Number 12, combination gunsmith tool, the Frontier's multi-tool. Out on the trail, a gunsmith was usually 100 miles away. So cowboys learned to be their own. Tucked in a small leather pouch or wrapped in oiled cloth, many carried a combination tool, a pocket-sized piece of steel with a screwdriver blade, pin punch, and sometimes a cone wrench for older percussion pistols. Colt, Remington, and Smith & Wesson all supplied them with factory kits, but plenty were forged by local blacksmiths from spare iron or broken files. One turn tightened a loose side plate screw. Another tapped out a stuck pin after a long, dusty ride. Even a bent ejector rod could be straightened enough to fire again. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was what kept a revolver alive. Trail accounts from cattle drives mention men stripping pistols by firelight, cleaning parts with kerosene, then reassembling them before dawn. Without that bit of steel, a simple malfunction could end more than your day. The combination tool was a Frontier mechanic's insurance policy, the difference between a click and a bang when it counted. Number 11, awl, needle, and thread kit, repair or bleed. Leather fails faster than legends. A torn holster or snapped belt strap could end a ride, or a life, long before a bullet did. That's why every serious cowboy kept a needle, awl, and waxed thread close at hand. Some rolled the kit in a scrap of hide and tied it to their belt. Others tucked it in a cartridge pouch beside the gun. When a saddle cinch broke or a holster seam tore, there wasn't time to find a saddler. You fixed it or you lost your rig. Frontier diaries mention riders sewing boots by campfire light, stitching leather damp so the holes closed tight when it dried. The waxed linen thread kept dust and sweat from rotting the repair. It was slow, bloody work, hands blistered, fingers pricked raw. But every stitch was self-reliance made visible. The West didn't reward men who waited for help. It rewarded the ones who could fix their own gear and keep riding. If you've made it this far, you're clearly here for the real history, not the Hollywood version. Tap that like button so I know to keep digging into more forgotten Frontier gear. Number 10, match safe and tinder, fire on your hip. Out on the plains, fire was everything: warmth, food, light, and life. But one summer storm or river crossing could turn a box of matches into dead weight. That's why cowboys carried match safes, small brass or nickel tubes sealed tight with a screw cap or cork. Inside were sulfur-tipped matches and a strip of dry tinder, sometimes charcloth, sometimes curls of shaved pine. A few men still kept flint and steel rolled in oilskin, old habits from percussion cap days. Match safes turned up in mail-order catalogs by the 1870s. Wells Fargo guards, drovers, and surveyors bought them in bulk. The wealthy carried silver ones engraved with initials. The rest used whatever held a spark. Frontier diaries mention men lighting fires in driving rain, tapping the tube against their boot heel to dry a match before striking. One flame meant hot coffee, dry powder, and a night without freezing to death. Hollywood gave cowboys quick draws and lucky shots. The real ones cared more about the little tin on their belt, because without that spark, there was no next morning. Number 9, pocket knife, the Frontier's universal tool. If a revolver was a cowboy's argument, the pocket knife was the answer to everything else. Food, rope, leather, kindling. Most days, the blade on your belt worked more than the gun it sat beside. Knives rode a dozen ways, slipped behind cartridge loops in a small rawhide sheath sewn to the belt's back, or folded deep in a trouser pocket with a thong tied up to the belt so it wouldn't vanish in tall grass. Folding jacks and barlows were common, simple carbon steel that took a wicked edge and gave it up just as fast to dust and sweat. A few men favored small fixed blades, the sheath stitched tight and oiled until they squeaked when drawn. A good knife cut plug tobacco, sharpened pencil stubs for tally books, and trimmed frayed latigo on a saddle. It split kindling when matches were scarce and scraped a spark from flint when they were gone. When a holster seam failed, The knife opened the leather clean for a proper repair. When a steer tangled in wire, it bought the animal its legs back. Store catalogs from the 1870s, H. Boker, I. Wilson, and American makers pushed working jacks for drovers and teamsters. Period photos show worn bolsters, chipped scales, blades ground low from years of stones and steels, no engraving, no flourish, just honest steel polished by pockets and use. Hollywood armed every man with a showpiece. The frontier armed him with what he needed. And the tool that earned its keep every day wasn't the one that fired once a season. It was the little blade that never left his belt. Number 8, sharpening stone or steel, edge work. A dull knife was worse than no knife at all. That's why every working cowboy carried something to keep an edge on his steel. Sometimes it was a pocket whetstone, a pale block of novaculite from Arkansas, or soapstone picked off the trail. Others carried a small steel rod, the same kind a cook or butcher would use, cut short and hung from the belt by a thong. Whatever the shape, the rule was the same. Keep it handy, keep it dry. A man might touch up his blade while waiting on cattle to water, or sit by the fire running the edge till it sang. Frontier diaries mention men trading stones the way soldiers traded tobacco. A fine gritstone was worth more than gold when your knife was dull halfway through a drive. Sharpening wasn't just for knives either. Axes, awls, chisels, even the edge of a tin cup. Everything got a pass. That rhythmic scrape in the night wasn't always someone cleaning a gun. Sometimes it was just a tired hand bringing a knife back to life. The movies show the West as fast. The truth is, it was careful. And no one careful ever rode without a way to make his edge bite again. Number 7, small hideout pistol or derringer, insurance in an inch of steel. For all the talk of 6 shooters, most fights in the West happened too close for comfort. That's why many men carried a second gun, small, secret, and deadly up close. The derringer was the king of concealment. Barely 6 inches long and firing a single .41 caliber shot. It fit behind a belt buckle, inside a boot top, or sewn into the lining of a vest. By the 1870s, metallic cartridge models from Remington and Sharps had made them reliable enough to trust for one last chance. Cowboys called them belly guns. Gamblers and barkeeps favored them under aprons or tucked into waistbands. A few lawmen hid tiny Colts inside their cartridge belts. One pull from the brass buckle, and a man had a shot before anyone saw where it came from. Newspaper reports mention outlaws caught with pocket pistols secreted beneath the belt, and museum specimens show the wear marks where steel rubbed against leather from years of being hidden, loaded, and forgotten. It wasn't a duelist's weapon, it was insurance. One round, no reload, meant to buy a heartbeat when everything else failed. In a world where seconds decided who told the story later, a hidden pistol behind the belt could make sure you were the one left to tell it. Number 6, spare gun parts and screws, the Cowboys field kit. Frontier guns were tough, but not indestructible. A broken spring or lost screw could turn a 6-shooter into dead weight. That's why experienced riders carried spare parts tucked into the same belt that held their cartridges. A few small screws wrapped in oiled cloth, an extra mainspring, or even a spare firing pin could mean the difference between a working revolver and a useless hunk of steel. Colt and Remington both sold armorer's packets in the 1870s, envelopes of tiny parts meant for dealers and traveling repairmen. Cowboys and scouts bought what they could, storing the bits in match tins or percussion cap boxes that still rattled with history from earlier guns. Trail diaries mention men stripping sidearms by lamplight, using the tip of a cartridge case as a screwdriver. If something fell into the dust, it was gone forever, so most carried backups. Museum restorers still find mismatched screws and handmade springs in frontier weapons, evidence of riders fixing them with whatever fit. These weren't gunslingers polishing chrome, they were field mechanics keeping tools alive. Hollywood heroes had a line for every draw. Real cowboys had a handful of screws, and they were the ones who kept shooting when everyone else's luck jammed. If you're still watching, you're the kind of viewer this channel was built for. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive into the real history behind the West. Number 5. Compass or watch fob, the gentleman's secret gear. Not every tool on a cowboy's belt was meant for fighting. Some were meant for finding the way back home. Tucked behind cartridge loops or hanging discreetly from a chain, a few cowboys, scouts, and lawmen carried a small compass or pocket watch. The mark of a man who rode alone and needed more than instinct to get through the wilderness. Rail agents and surveyors favored folding compasses housed in brass cases. Army scouts like Al Sieber were known to carry pocket compasses from military supply stores, while wealthier drovers and marshals bought English or American watches with thick glass and nickel chains that looped right back to the gun belt. These weren't luxuries, they were lifelines. A pocket watch told you when to rest a horse or how long till dark. A compass kept you alive when the plains looked the same in every direction. Lawmen who rode from town to town learned to hide them under the belt flap, out of sight from thieves and the dust that ruined delicate gears. Surviving examples in the Autry and Smithsonian collections still show sweat-darkened leather guards cut precisely to fit the fob chain. Movies gave every cowboy a sense of direction. The real ones earned it, from brass, gears, and a needle that pointed toward survival. Number 4. Tobacco and rolling kit, smoke and sanity. For all the hardship of the trail, there were few comforts a cowboy could count on. A warm fire, a full belly, and a roll of tobacco when the day was finally done. That's why most gun belts carried a tobacco pouch, a small drawstring bag or folded oilskin packet tucked beside the cartridge loops. Inside were shredded leaf, thin paper, and sometimes a flint or match tucked in for later. The pouch tied tight to keep sweat and dust out, because once your tobacco went damp, it was useless. Store-bought brands like Durham and Climax were popular, but plenty of men twisted their own plugs from whatever leaf they could trade for. Frontier photos often show pouches bulging against a cowboy's belt or vest pocket. Some were carved from leftover saddle leather, others sewn from old gloves. Lighting up wasn't vanity, it was routine. After branding, after gunfire, after the worst kind of silence, a cigarette steadied the hands and settled the nerves. It was the West's cheapest medicine. On long nights, the glow of a roll-your-own was the only light some men had left. Hollywood made heroes smoke for style. The real cowboys did it for sanity. Number 3. Charms and keepsakes. Luck on a leather strap. A cowboy's gun belt carried more than metal and leather. Sometimes it carried memory. Tied between cartridge loops or stitched beneath the buckle flap, many riders kept small tokens from home. A coin rubbed smooth by years of worry, a scrap of ribbon, a photograph folded so tight the faces were half gone. Lawmen on long patrols carried lockets with a wife's picture. Drifters kept saint medals, horseshoe nails, or carved bones for luck. Superstition ran thick on the trail. If a man's rig saw him through a fight, he didn't dare change a thing about it, not even the charm that hung from it. Archaeologists still find tiny trinkets buried with belts on frontier grave sites. Objects never meant to be seen, just touched when the night stretched long and the work turned mean. It was the closest thing many men had to prayer. Hollywood dressed the West in silver and showmanship. The real West carried its treasures in private, stitched into sweat-darkened leather close enough to reach when luck was the only thing left to hold on to. Number 2. Cartridge slides. Swap what the day demands. The best belts weren't built for one gun, they were built to adapt. That's where cartridge slides came in. Instead of stitching loops directly into the belt, saddlers made removable leather blocks, 5 to 10 loops each. That slipped over the strap and could be swapped in seconds. A ranch hand could run pistol rounds on one side, rifle cartridges on the other, or change them out completely before heading into town. Stage line guards kept shotgun slides ready near the buckle for when trouble came up close. Slides dried faster after a storm, replaced easier when the leather stretched, and let one rig serve a dozen different jobs. Frontier Supply catalogs from Collins and Morrison and Montgomery Ward sold them cheap. Sliding loops for all calibers, the DIY solution of the Old West. Few originals survive intact. The small straps wore through from years of pulling rounds. But when you see a battered belt with a darker patch near the buckle, that's where a slide once rode. Hollywood's cowboys wore rigs that never changed. Real ones built theirs to evolve. Because in the West, the man who adapted fastest usually walked away. Number 1, flint and steel roll, the backup spark. Before there were matches and safes and fancy fire starters, a cowboy's last spark lived in a scrap of cloth. Tucked inside the same belt that carried his ammunition, many riders kept a flint and steel roll, a tiny bundle of cloth, charred linen, or fungus tinder wrapped tight against the weather. Even after friction matches appeared, old hands kept the roll. Matches failed. Flint didn't. The setup was simple. Strike the steel, catch the spark, and feed it to a twist of grass or a shred of cotton. A man could light his campfire in the wind or touch off damp powder when nothing else would burn. Trappers and scouts swore by it. Cowhands learned from them. Museum examples show worn steel curls polished bright from thousands of strikes, the edges blackened by smoke. It wasn't just tradition, it was insurance. If the matches washed away crossing a river, this little roll could still mean heat, food, and life. Hollywood made the frontier loud. Guns, horses, saloons. But the real West was often quiet, and sometimes all that broke that silence was the soft ring of steel and the spark that refused to die. 15 hidden items, each one a reminder that the Wild West ran on more than grit and gunpowder. It ran on small practical things. The tools, oils, charms, and scraps of cloth that kept men and their weapons alive. Every loop, every stain, every mark in that leather tells a story. Not of legends, but of labor. Of men who carried their world at their waist and trusted it more than luck. Hollywood turned the cowboy's belt into a costume. History shows it for what it was: a toolbox, a lifeline, a diary in leather. The West wasn't clean, it wasn't polished, but it was real. And the proof of that reality still sits behind glass, darkened by sweat and dust from hands that built a nation the hard way. If you've made it this far, you've seen what the movies never show. Not the myths of the Old West, but the mechanics of survival that kept it alive.